History can be found anywhere, even in your own backyard. So join us as we search the land looking for the stories that helped shape this nation. Come on the porch, grab a drink, and join us for a little bit of history from the homestead. Hey there, history buffs, and welcome to another episode of the History from the Homestead podcast. I am your host, Thomas Carroll, and today we are talking with Dave Williams about moon trees. I know what you're thinking, moon trees, there's no trees on the moon, but I promise you we will get there. So, Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks very much for having me.
So, before we really dive in, let's specify as there's no trees on the moon, but what are moon trees as far as that's what we're calling them?
Yeah. Well, okay. So what happened was in 1971 on Apollo 14, the command module pilot, who was the one of the three who did not go down to the moon surface, but stayed in the command module while the other two went down, uh, named Stuart Roosa, had worked previously for the Forest Service as a smoke jumper. And as part of that, as part of what he wanted to sort of pay a tribute to the Forest Service, he brought with him some hundreds of tree seeds that he packed in his personal kit, that he brought up with him, that orbited the moon with him, came back down to Earth, and then they were germinated, and then they were planted all over the United States as part of the bicentennial, and um, so they're the moon trees. Yeah, they're
The long
yeah.
and short of it. And I'm even sorry to viewers, I got completely ahead of myself already. I'm so excited to talk about this. I didn't give you a chance to give a short bio on yourself, but I wanted, you know, so
Oh yeah, sure, sure,
tell
sure.
us
Yeah,
about
right.
yourself before we dive in any deeper and I get way in over my head.
Okay, so sure. No, so my name's Dave Williams. I've been working for NASA at the NASA Space Science Data Coordinated Archive, which is one of NASA's deep archives for their spacecraft data. I've been working there for over 30 years now. Um, there, basically, I'm in charge of the planetary and lunar data there, and which is why I'm associated with the Apollo program. And that's sort of how my name came up originally about the moon trees and why I started doing this, because it's not exactly in my job description. It's sort of, I mean, I'm mostly taking care of the actual data that's been returned from various lunar and planetary missions. So I'm the moon trees are definitely an offshoot of that, but because it's it's an interesting story, I sort of got
Yeah,
involved in it and going from there. Yeah.
yeah. And you put together a database as well for the moon trees of where they're all planted at, because there's 400 some of them, I believe.
Yeah, we don't know how many there are so far. I've found, and when I say I've found, it means basically other people have found and told me about them. um, there are about 120, I think, maybe 140 if you count the ones that are no longer alive, something like that. There were probably 400 to 500 seeds taken. We know that some of them didn't make it, so we really don't know exactly how many were distributed and how many are still alive out there. So it's a kind of an ongoing search, I guess, really.
Oh, well, there you go. To anybody that's listening, if you stumble upon one and it's not recorded, just send an email out and we can add it to the list and then we'll know. So,
Absolutely. Yep. I mean, that's how I found all of them, really, is other people letting me know about them.
so why why did they decide to take seeds along on the Apollo 14 mission?
So right. So Stuart Roosa had spent a year as a smoke jumper, which is this thing where out in sort of Oregon, they they fly over remote forest fires, and they drop these guys and they parachute down, and they fight the fires because it's really the only way they can get to them. So it's a little crazy, but he did this one summer. He loved it. He'd worked for the Forest Service before that, and he really, I guess, apparently was always an outdoors type person. Always loved the forests and loved working for the Forest Service. And so when he got selected for Apollo 14 as the command module pilot, he went back to the people he knew at the Forest Service, and he said, what would be a good thing I could do? I'm going to go to Apollo 14. I'd love to do something with the Forest Service. And so they came up with this idea that he would bring these tree seeds. Now, every astronaut got this personal kit, which is just a little sort of a little canvas bag that they basically put in their pocket almost, that they were allowed to bring with them with anything they wanted. I mean, so a lot of the astronauts brought maybe photographs. They rolled them up and put them in there. They brought coins or stamps that then they would give out to their family members or friends as souvenirs, things like that, and or other mementos that meant something to them. So what he did was he got the Forest Service to package, like I said, about 400 to 500 tree seeds. And tree seeds are really tiny, so they don't take up very much space. And they packaged them all in this little metal canister, and he put it in his personal kit, and he brought it with him. So they got to go around the moon, and when they came back, handed them over to NASA, and NASA started germinating them. And NASA was not so successful, so NASA called on the Forest Service and basically said, you better take over here, and you better take these seeds and germinate them. And they did. And so this was all in 1971, 72. By 1976, they had seedlings that were, fairly large enough certainly to transport and plant. And they sent them out all over the country, and they planted them usually as part of bicentennial celebrations in 1976, wherever. And they got planted in state capitals, and they got planted at NASA centers, but they also got planted at small parks, little, local museums. A lot of them just got planted in places that you've never heard of. So they're not all, at the state capitol. They're not all at Kennedy or Goddard Space Flight Center. They're in places, like I said, the little parks, little towns that you've probably never heard of.
Yeah. So this didn't officially start out as an experiment, because when you think about the Apollo going to the moon, the goal was the moon, but they did all sorts of experiments while en route, while coming home. But so the seeds weren't officially one of the science experiments initially.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. The science experiments. I mean, that's my job, right? those data. And they even set up. I mean, they set up experiments there that ran on the moon without the astronauts after they left for like 7 years, and returned data. So there's a ton of science data. But the moon trees, exactly right. They were. I mean, they tried to treat it a little bit like a science experiment. They kept control seeds. It's hard to describe. I mean, no one expected there to be any difference. I mean, they were seeds. They were up in space for a week. They weren't exposed to any more radiation, obviously, than the astronauts were exposed to. It wasn't any dangerous amount of radiation. They were in zero gravity for a week, but no one really expected there to be any difference. But they did look into it. They did observe how the things grew and everything, just in case. I mean, in case something happened. But really, it was a public relations thing. That's what it was.
Okay.
It was. No one tried to pretend it was really a science experiment.
Oh, okay, I see. 'Cause can be a little confusing where you read about it, but and
Yes.
then as you said, there was no difference whatsoever in the trees that
Right.
went to the moon, about other than they have about 500,000 miles on them, as opposed to.
Well, exactly. Right. They're, when people say, sometimes people say, well, what's so special about these? Why are these trees special? They're just like every other tree. They haven't changed at all. I mean, I just say, hey, they're closer to the moon than you'll ever be.
Yeah,
So,
they've traveled, they traveled 500,000 miles, which I'm a
yeah.
truck driver, and it would take me a little over 5 years to do 500,000 miles, and they did it in, a little less than two
Wow.
weeks,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. Yes. Right.
So,
Right.
and Now, like I was reading some of the, not all states even have them because some of the states just they don't have the proper climate for the trees that were planted when they came back. I know. I'll read them off here because I haven't pulled up. I can't speak. There was they were loblolly pine, sycamore, sweet gum, redwood, and Douglas fir. Which
Right.
we were talking before the show. I have just found out there's one tree here local that is a sycamore. So, but do we know how many states so far? How many states have?
Oh boy, you know what? I counted that once. I
Oh,
think
burning
it's
questions.
yeah, right. I mean, I've got the list. I could go count through the list. I think it was something like 30, between 30 and 35, I think,
That's
if I remember
still
correctly. So most states, well, and now that's the ones we know of. There's records of other states um, having been planning, at least been planned to have them sent to them, let's say, and yet we haven't found any of them. So there, there are other states. I think none got sent to Hawaii. None of those trees would really be able to grow in Hawaii, and I don't believe any got sent to Alaska. I think every other state was potentially a home for the moon trees. In other words, I don't think any states were ruled out because of their climate besides Hawaii and Alaska. But some states are better than others. There's not very many, and maybe there were none uh, um, planted in like New England for whatever reason. Um, so I don't know, why. I mean, like, and whether there's New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine haven't found any trees there. There's in Massachusetts, yes, and but so but anyway, again, I
yeah.
don't know.
We'll
I
just
don't
we'll
know
have
exactly.
I'll just have to leave the listeners to do the legwork and look it up for
Okay.
themselves, and they can see where it is instead of us going through the whole list here and now trying to figure it out. Um, Now, trying let's see, I'm trying to think. I had a question for you, and I've completely lost it
Mhm.
already. So I'm gonna. So now, how did you get involved in the Moon Trees part? Because you weren't a part of it initially.
No, no, not at all. Right. I mean, yeah, when this was done, I was, 13, 14 years old. I remember the mission. I remember watching Apollo 14, land on the moon and all that stuff was cool. In fact, that's the mission where Alan Shepard hit the golf ball. That's usually what people remember about it.
Ah,
That's kind of but in any case, um, uh, yeah. So I mean, I'd been working, I guess, at NASA at that point for about 3 or 4 years, and it was the end of 1996. So I was in charge of along with all the planetary data, the Apollo data. So there were a lot of web pages that we had, and this is kind of early in the days of the World Wide Web, right? This was around by 1996. Um, and so I had my name and my contact information were in a lot of pages about the Apollo missions, and I got an email one day uh, in December in 1996 from a third grade Indiana, and she was having her class do this project on trees, local trees, and there was a tree at a local Girl Scout camp, and she said had a sign on it that said it was a moon tree. And the only thing they knew about it was it had something to do with Apollo, but they didn't know anything else about it. And I guess the idea was, well, I had my name on these pages that were all about Apollo and stuff. So did I know anything about these moon trees? And I'd never heard of them. I'd never heard of moon trees. Um, but I was at Goddard Space Flight Center. There were a lot of people there who had actually worked on Apollo that were still around. A lot of the old timers. So I just went around and sort of asked, what about the moon trees? Well, no one knew about them. No one had heard of these things either. So I thought, okay, this is really odd. I contacted the NASA History Office, and I also went online and looked on the web, and at that time, of course, it was fairly early in the web. They had search engines, but they were fairly they weren't like now, like Google or these things where you can find so much stuff so quickly. You get a million hits whatever you put in there. Um, but I did find a few things. There were a few things about moon trees on the web pages, and the history office got back to me, and they sent me some clippings from newspapers back in 1976 that gave some of the a little bits and pieces of information. So it was enough that I could kind of put together the story. So I got enough of the story to know, okay, well, it was Apollo 14. It was Stuart Roosa. He brought the seeds. They were planted. They were planted around the United States on the bicentennial. And so I answered Joan, the teacher, the third grade teacher, back, and I said, well, here's the story as much as I know, and this is what I was able to find out about the trees, and so I answered it, and okay, that was cool. But then I thought, this is such a cool story, and no one knows about it. I mean, no one that I talked to, knew anything about it, and I'd never heard of it, and I thought, well, I've got all these pages on the Apollo missions. I'll just make up a page on the moon trees and add it in there. Like I said, it's it's really not part of my job, but they're always encouraging us to do public outreach at NASA. So I thought, well, this is a good opportunity, and this is a cool story, and I hate to see it get lost. So I put up the rudimentary story, and I put up a little list of the trees I'd found, which was like 6 trees that I'd gotten between the history office and what I'd found online. There were about 6 trees on my original list. And I put a note at the bottom. I said, hey, if you know about a moon tree, please let me know, and put my email address there. Well, I started getting emails back. Slowly over time, I would get an email here, an email there, and someone said, "Oh, I stumbled across your page, and we have a tree in a park near us, or we have a tree at the museum, or there's a tree at the state capitol, and it has a sign, and it says it's a moon tree." And so slowly, I started building up this list, and then I started hearing from some of the people in the Forest Service who actually had been part of the program. So I got a lot more information about the program. So I kind of expanded the page with more information and started adding more pages to it and adding more trees to it. And over time, it just grew. And yeah, now it's, like I said, it's got 100 and I don't know how many trees on it, and really a lot of the story now. I think most of the story. There's a few missing pieces, but most of the story I think is there now.
And that's wild how hidden it is. And for anybody who wants to check the page, you have the link here. And I will share it on Facebook, on my webpage, everything. But it's excuse me, simply nssdc dot gsfc dot nasa dot gov /planetary /lunar /moon tree. And you can see the backstory to it. There's a list of where the trees are, what states they're in, their locations. You even have like a couple pictures and news clippings from what you have from. I think there was a letter from uh, Command Module Pilot Roosa as well, I believe, on there, if I'm not mistaken,
Yes,
about
yeah.
it.
Yeah, I know I've gotten yeah, a lot of people have gone to well, there's a Forest Service office in Placerville, California, and there's another one in Gulfport, Mississippi, where they actually germinated them. And the one in Placerville, there was a woman who was really interested in the moon trees, and she went up there and visited, and they had a whole bunch of uh, documentation, and so she made copies of that. And later on, I contacted them, and I got more information from them. And so that's a lot of that comes from people who have just gone sort of gone out of their way to find some of this stuff and sent it along. So yeah, it's been great. I mean, I've had a lot of help from a lot of people putting this information together, and it's been really fun.
That's great. And we haven't heard the last of moon trees. As we were talking backstage briefly that they're planning on doing it again for Artemis coming up here.
Well, and actually, yes, they've done the first part of it already. So the
Oh,
Artemis 1 mission, right, the Artemis 1 mission, which was the test flight, the uncrewed, there were no astronauts on it, test flight, but they wanted to, of course, check out all the systems before they actually put people on it. They flew that to the moon, and back to Earth, and on that one they put they filled it up with, well, filled it up. They put I think a couple thousand tree seeds on that one. The same species that they used for the original moon trees, except the redwood was replaced with a different type of sequoia. But other than that, the Douglas fir, the loblolly pine, the sweet gum, and the sycamore, they flew all those seeds on the Artemis 1 mission. They're now back on Earth. They're germinating them, and they are planning to give them out
My goodness.
all over the country. And they've asked for people who wants a moon tree. They want to give them, I think, to organizations, to schools, and things like that. But again, yes, we'll have another generation of moon trees growing here very soon.
And that's great. Yeah, come to a park near you, moon trees.
Very, very possibly, right.
That's great. Are they gonna do more possibly? Do you know when we do eventually return, humans to the moon?
I don't know. Right. I don't know for a fact. I don't know of any actual plans to do it, but I'd be surprised if they didn't. Somewhere along these future missions, I'd be very surprised if someone did, say, for example, oh well, let's take a batch of these actually down to the moon, onto the surface, right, and then bring it back and have moon trees that have not only orbited the moon but have actually been,
Been
on
on
the
the
moon.
moon.
Right, right. And like I said, I don't know of any plans to do that. But I, I'd kind of be surprised if they didn't follow up on this and do more things like that.
And that's you don't know till you try. That's the great part of science. You get
Right.
to look, with your job, you get to look at that information every day. So
Yeah. Yeah.
and here before we sign off officially, you do have a disclaimer as well that we do need to add.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, thanks for giving me
Yes.
the opportunity. Right. I just need to say that anything that I'm talking about here, anything I'm saying are just my own opinions. They don't represent the official any official statements or opinions of NASA. It's just me. So if if there's anything you disagree with or anything I got wrong, that's all on me.
um Before we go, I have to ask one burning question that's just been in the back of my mind since you deal with Apollo data. What, and this may be a hard one to answer, but which Apollo mission would have been your favorite?
Oh boy. Oh boy. That's a tough one. I
not
mean,
not related at all to the subject. It's just I more or
that's
less
right.
have to
That's
know.
right. That's right. Although you can imagine over the last almost 20 years, I've have grown my affection for the Apollo 14 mission has grown quite a bit. I mean, I've read a lot about Stuart Roosa and actually in a way that's in some ways that's always been one of my favorites because that was actually the first one that I got to see live. It turned out that Apollo 11 was, at least, yeah, to see, yeah. Well, Apollo 11, I was in a cabin up in New Hampshire in the woods, and we didn't have a television set. So I listened to that on the radio, which is a very different experience, I think, than seeing it on television. It was exciting to me because I was always kind of a space nerd. So I was always thought, I thought it was a great, the Apollo 11, it was amazing. Apollo 12, they burned the camera out right after they got on the surface. So they never had any video. So I didn't get to see that one either. They basically only had audio from that one. I don't know, some of your listeners may remember that. Apollo 13 obviously never made it to the moon. So Apollo 14 was actually my first opportunity to see live video coverage of the moon. So in a way that was always, kind of, in a way that was my first moon mission. So I've always been fond of that one. So I guess I would say it's the short answer probably is Apollo 14.
Wow. Well, Dave, I thank you for taking the time to talk about this. It was, and we did it kind of put together pretty quick because I had just heard about moon trees just a handful of days ago, and it is something that you should know about because it's interesting. So
Yeah, no, I think it's a very cool story, and like I said, I got caught up in it almost right away and said, wow, people should kind of know about this. And so it's been just fun because like I said, not part of my regular job, and I never would have guessed if you asked me some time ago that I'd be doing this, when I started working at NASA,
Yeah.
he said, "Oh, in 30 years, you'll be cataloging these trees." I would have. I said, "No, I don't think that's going
Yeah.
to happen."
Well, even
So
when you think about NASA, you
great.
definitely don't think about trees. That's not the
That's
first
right.
thing that comes to mind.
That's
So,
right. No, that's very true. No.
all right. I thank you again very much for talking to me about this. It was great to talk about it.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. Thank you. Thanks for having me. And yeah, all right. Well, take care.
Thanks to everybody for listening. Remember, if you like the show, you can share it with all your friends. We can be found on all the major podcast players. We can be found on Facebook. And you can also find us and catch the show notes at historyfromthehomestead.com.